The crack of a gunshot echoed through the small town of Willow Creek, Montana, as Eleanor Fletcher shielded her eyes from the afternoon sun, watching in disbelief as the marriage contract that had been forced into her hands just moments before fluttered to the ground in tatters. The year was 1879, and her world had just been turned upside down twice in one day, first by her cousin's betrayal, and now by the intervention of a stranger whose revolver was still smoking. "I believe the lady said no," came the deep voice of the man on horseback, his face partially obscured by the shadow of his hat. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs as her cousin Charles bellowed in outrage. "You have no right," Charles Fletcher shouted, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. "This is family business. Forcing a woman to marry against her will stop being anyone's business when Montana became a territory." The stranger replied calmly, holstering his weapon with practiced ease. He dismounted in one fluid motion, revealing himself to be tall and broad-shouldered, with piercing blue eyes that settled on Eleanor with unexpected gentleness. Eleanor clutched her shawl tighter around her shoulders, embarrassment and relief washing over her in equal measure. The entire main street of Willow Creek had come to a standstill, with townspeople frozen in place, watching the drama unfold. "Miss, are you all right?" the stranger asked, approaching Eleanor with a respectful distance between them. Yes," she managed, finding her voice at last. "Though I'm not sure how to thank someone for shooting a document." A hint of a smile touched the man's lips. "Beau Ironwood." He introduced himself with a slight tip of his hat. "And no thanks necessary. Couldn't stand by and watch such an injustice." Charles stepped between them, his voice lowered to a threatening hiss. "You've made a grave mistake, Cowboy. My cousin's future is secured by that contract, and you've just destroyed it. The agreement with James Wilson is final. She will marry him next week as planned." Eleanor's stomach churned at the mention of James Wilson, a man 30 years her senior with a reputation for cruelty toward his previous 2 wives, both now deceased under questionable circumstances. Ever since her parents had died 6 months ago, leaving her in the care of her cousin Charles, he had been determined to marry her off to the highest bidder, which happened to be the wealthy cattle baron Wilson. "The only thing final here is my decision," Eleanor stated firmly, surprising even herself with her boldness. "I will not marry Mr. Wilson, contract or no contract." Beau Ironwood's eyes sparkled with approval. "Seems clear enough to me," he said. Charles grabbed Eleanor's arm roughly. "You ungrateful girl. After all I've done, taking you in when no one else would, this is how you repay me? With disobedience and public humiliation." "Let her go," Beau warned, his hand hovering near his holster. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife, but it was broken by the authoritative voice of Sheriff Miller approaching from the direction of his office. "What in tarnation is going on here?" the sheriff demanded, his gaze shifting between the 3 main participants in the standoff. Charles immediately adjusted his demeanor, smoothing his coat and forcing a congenial smile. "Just a family disagreement, Sheriff. Nothing to concern yourself with." "A disagreement that involves gunfire in the middle of town?" Sheriff Miller questioned skeptically. "The lady was being forced into marriage against her will," Beau explained, not taking his eyes off Charles. "I merely expressed my opinion on the matter." The sheriff sighed, clearly not wanting to get involved in what appeared to be a complicated situation. "Take your family matters out of the public street, Charles. And you, stranger, we don't settle differences with gunfire in Willow Creek. Next time, it'll be a night in my jail." Beau nodded respectfully but didn't back down. "Understood, Sheriff. Though I hope there won't be a next time." As the sheriff walked away, insisting the gathering crowd disperse, Charles leaned close to Eleanor, whispering harshly, "This isn't over. You'll be Mrs. Wilson by the end of the month, or you'll find yourself without a roof over your head or a penny to your name." With that threat lingering in the air, Charles stormed off toward the saloon, leaving Eleanor standing alone with Beau Ironwood in the dusty street. "Thank you," she said quietly, "though I fear you may have only delayed the inevitable." Beau studied her face, noting the determination in her green eyes despite the fear that lingered there. "Nothing's inevitable if you don't want it to be, Miss Fletcher. Do you have somewhere safe to go?" Eleanor shook her head, the reality of her situation sinking in. "Charles is my only family in these parts. I've been living at his ranch since my parents passed." Beau considered this information, absently stroking his horse's mane. "I'm heading to the Rocking Bee Ranch a few miles north of here. My friend Benjamin owns it, and his wife Sarah could use some help with their newborn. They're good people. If you'd like, I could take you there just until you figure out your next move." The offer was tempting, almost too tempting for a proper lady to accept from a man she just met. But as Eleanor glanced in the direction Charles had gone, then back at the kind face of the cowboy before her, she realized she had few options. "I don't even know you, Mr. Ironwood," she said hesitantly. "That's true," he acknowledged with a nod. "But sometimes the kindness of strangers is all we have to rely on. I give you my word as a gentleman that you'll be safe with me, and the Bakers are respected throughout the territory." Eleanor took a deep breath, weighing her limited choices. She could return to Charles's ranch and face his wrath, along with the prospect of being married off to James Wilson, or she could trust this mysterious cowboy who had already come to her aid once. "I'll need to collect my things," she decided, straightening her shoulders. Beau smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his weather-worn face. "I'll wait for you at the general store. Take only what you need. We'll be riding double until we can arrange something more suitable." An hour later, Eleanor returned to find Beau true to his word, waiting patiently outside the general store with his horse. She had changed into a simpler riding dress and carried only a small bag containing her most essential belongings and the locket her mother had given her before passing. "My cousin is still at the saloon," she informed him, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "But he'll notice I'm gone by nightfall." "By then we'll be well on our way," Beau assured her, helping her mount his horse before swinging up behind her. The proximity was improper by any standard of decency, but necessity overruled propriety in that moment. As they rode out of town, Eleanor felt a mixture of terror and exhilaration. She had never done anything so impulsive in her 22 years, yet she couldn't deny the sense of rightness that accompanied her decision. "May I ask what brings you to Willow Creek, Mr. Ironwood?" she asked after they had put some distance between themselves and the town. "Beau, please," he corrected gently. "I've been working cattle drives between Texas and Montana for the past few years. Benjamin Baker and I rode together for a spell, and when he settled down with his ranch, he offered me a position as his foreman. I was passing through Willow Creek on my way to take him up on that offer." "So you're not usually in the business of rescuing damsels in distress?" she asked with a hint of humor in her voice. Beau chuckled, the sound rumbling against her back. "Can't say it's a regular occurrence, though I've never been one to stand by when someone needs help." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the Montana landscape spreading before them in rolling hills and distant mountains. The afternoon sun warmed their faces, and for the first time in months, Eleanor felt a sense of peace. "If it's not too forward," Beau ventured eventually, "might I ask why your cousin was so determined to marry you off to this Wilson fellow?" Eleanor's shoulders tensed slightly. "Money, primarily. My parents left me a small inheritance, but Charles controls it until I marry. The agreement with Mr. Wilson included a substantial payment to Charles, essentially selling me to clear his gambling debts." Beau's jaw tightened. "That's not right." "No," Eleanor agreed softly. "It's not. But as an unmarried woman with limited means, my options are few." "Not anymore," Beau assured her. The Bakers will welcome you, and from there, you can decide your own path. As promised, they arrived at the Rocking Bee Ranch just as the sun was beginning to set. The main house was modest but well built, with a wide porch and smoke curling from the chimney. A woman with kind eyes and flour-dusted hands greeted them at the door, a baby balanced on her hip. "Beau Ironwood, as I live and breathe," she exclaimed warmly. "Benjamin said you might be coming, but we weren't expecting you for another week at least." "Plans changed, Sarah," Beau replied, helping Eleanor dismount. "This is Miss Eleanor Fletcher. She's in need of safe harbor for a while." Sarah's welcoming smile never faltered as her gaze moved to Eleanor. "Any friend of Beau's is welcome here. Come in, both of you. Benjamin's out checking the north pasture but should be back for supper." The interior of the home was warm and inviting, with simple furnishings and the delicious aroma of fresh bread and stew filling the air. As Beau explained a simplified version of their situation, Sarah's expression grew concerned. "Of course you must stay," she insisted to Eleanor. "We have a spare room and truthfully, I've been praying for help with little Joseph here. The good Lord works in mysterious ways." Eleanor felt tears sting her eyes at the immediate acceptance. "I'm happy to help in any way I can. I'm quite good with children." Sarah smiled, handing the baby to Eleanor without hesitation. "Then you're already answering prayers. Now, both of you get washed up for supper while I finish setting the table." That evening, as they sat around the Baker family table, Eleanor felt a sense of belonging she hadn't experienced since before her parents' passing. Benjamin Baker had returned home, greeting Beau like a brother and accepting Eleanor's presence without question once the situation was explained. "Wilson's reputation precedes him," Benjamin commented grimly. "You did right by helping the lady, Beau." "Any decent man would have done the same," Beau replied, though his eyes lingered on Eleanor in a way that suggested his motivations might not have been entirely selfless. As the days passed, Eleanor settled into life at the Rocking Bee. She helped Sarah with the household and baby Joseph, discovering a talent for ranch cooking that earned her high praise from the men. Beau took to his role as foreman with natural ease, spending long days working alongside Benjamin and the other hands, yet always finding time in the evenings to sit on the porch with Eleanor, sharing stories of his travels. 2 weeks after her arrival, the peaceful rhythm of ranch life was interrupted by the arrival of Sheriff Miller from Willow Creek, accompanied by Charles Fletcher and James Wilson. Eleanor was hanging laundry in the yard when she heard the approaching horses. Her blood ran cold at the sight of her cousin's smug expression. "There she is," Charles announced triumphantly. "I told you she'd be here, Sheriff." Beau emerged from the barn, positioning himself protectively near Eleanor as Benjamin came out from the house. "What's the meaning of this?" Benjamin demanded. Sheriff Miller looked uncomfortable but determined. "Mr. Fletcher has filed a complaint stating that his ward, Miss Eleanor Fletcher, was essentially kidnapped from his care. He has legal guardianship until she's married or turns 25. "That's absurd," Eleanor protested. "I came willingly. Mr. Ironwood saved me from being forced into marriage with that man." She pointed accusingly at James Wilson, who regarded her with cold, possessive eyes. "The law is clear," the sheriff stated reluctantly. "Without proof of mistreatment, a guardian's rights stand." "Miss Fletcher, I'm afraid you'll need to return with your cousin." Charles smirked. "The wedding will proceed as planned this Sunday." "No," Eleanor stated firmly, stepping forward. "I am 22 years old. I may not have full legal rights, but I cannot be forced to speak marriage vows against my will." "You will do as you're told," Charles hissed, dismounting and approaching her with menace in his eyes. Beau stepped between them. The lady said no. James Wilson spoke for the first time, his voice unervingly calm. "This doesn't concern you, Cowboy. The agreement is legal and binding. I've already paid a considerable sum for the privilege of making Miss Fletcher my wife. People aren't property to be bought and sold, Beau countered. And no paper can force a woman to marry against her will. The sheriff cleared his throat awkwardly. While that may be true in principle, Mr. Fletcher does have the right to insist his ward return to his home. Sarah, who had been watching from the porch with baby Joseph, stepped forward. Sheriff, perhaps we could discuss this civilly. Miss Fletcher has been a tremendous help to me these past weeks. Surely some arrangement could be made that satisfies everyone. Charles scoffed. The only arrangement I'll accept is Eleanor's immediate return and her marriage to Mr. Wilson as agreed. And if I refuse? Eleanor challenged, finding courage in Beau's steady presence beside her. Then I'll have the sheriff arrest your cowboy friend for kidnapping, Charles threatened. The penalty for such a crime is quite severe, I understand. Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. She couldn't bear the thought of Beau suffering because of her. Give me a moment to gather my things, she said quietly, her shoulders slumping in defeat. Eleanor, no. Beau protested, catching her arm gently. We'll find another way. She looked up at him, surprised by the intensity in his eyes. In the short time they'd known each other, something unspoken had grown between them, something that now gave her both strength and heartache. I won't have you arrested because of me, she whispered. Wait, Benjamin interrupted, stepping forward with purpose. Sheriff, I'd like to examine this so-called legal agreement. Charles reluctantly produced a document from his coat pocket. It's all in order, signed by myself as Eleanor's guardian and by Mr. Wilson as the groom. Benjamin studied the paper carefully, then passed it to the sheriff. Notice anything unusual, Sheriff? The date on this contract. The sheriff frowned, examining the document more closely. This is dated just yesterday. Precisely, Benjamin nodded. Which means this isn't the original contract that Beau shot to pieces. It's a new one, created after Eleanor had already left of her own free will. Charles sputtered indignantly. The terms are the same. The fact that I had to redraft it because of this cowboy's interference doesn't change the validity. Actually, it does, Benjamin countered. Because Eleanor wasn't present to witness this new agreement, nor was she consulted. And more importantly, the law requires that both parties be willing participants in a marriage contract. James Wilson's expression darkened. This is ridiculous. Fletcher, I paid you good money for your cousin's hand. Which brings us to another interesting point, Benjamin continued. Sheriff, it sounds like Mr. Wilson just admitted to essentially purchasing Miss Fletcher, which I believe constitutes human trafficking, a federal offense. The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Baker makes a valid point, gentlemen. Charles's face turned an alarming shade of purple. This is outrageous. You can't possibly. Furthermore, Benjamin pressed. I have reason to believe that Mr. Fletcher has been misappropriating Miss Fletcher's inheritance for his own purposes, which would constitute theft and fraud. Eleanor gasped. My inheritance? But you told me it was merely a small sum, barely enough to maintain me. Charles avoided her gaze. Don't be dramatic, Eleanor. I've been managing your affairs as any responsible guardian would. Perhaps we should have the territorial judge review the handling of Miss Fletcher's finances, the sheriff suggested, his previous reluctance giving way to professional interest. If there are irregularities. James Wilson remounted his horse abruptly. I didn't agree to this complication, Fletcher. Our deal is off. With a contemptuous glare at Eleanor, he added, No woman is worth this much trouble, before riding away. Charles looked from the sheriff to Benjamin to Beau, who had remained protectively close to Eleanor throughout the exchange. Realizing he was outnumbered and potentially facing legal scrutiny, Charles made a hasty decision. Fine, he spat. Keep her. But don't expect to see a penny of your parents' money, Eleanor. I'll make sure of that. I think the territorial judge will have something to say about that, Benjamin replied calmly. In fact, Sheriff, perhaps you should escort Mr. Fletcher back to town and help him prepare all financial records related to Miss Fletcher's inheritance for review. The sheriff nodded, seemingly relieved to have a path forward that didn't involve forcing a young woman into an unwanted marriage. That seems reasonable. Mr. Fletcher, shall we? With a final venomous glare at Eleanor and Beau, Charles allowed himself to be led away, muttering threats that grew fainter as they rode back toward town. When they were gone, Eleanor's knees nearly gave out with relief. Beau caught her elbow, steadying her. Are you all right? He asked softly. She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Benjamin patted her shoulder kindly. Don't worry, Miss Fletcher. I have some influence with the territorial judge. We'll make sure your inheritance is properly restored to you. I can never repay your kindness, she managed at last, looking between Benjamin and Sarah, who had joined them with baby Joseph cooing in her arms. No repayment necessary, Sarah assured her. That's not how family works. Family. The word warmed Eleanor's heart in a way she hadn't felt since losing her parents. Later that evening, as the sunset painted the Montana sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Eleanor found Beau sitting alone on the porch steps. May I join you? She asked hesitantly. He stood immediately, ever the gentleman. Of course. They sat side by side, watching the fading light in comfortable silence for several minutes before Beau spoke. I was worried today, he admitted quietly, when I thought you might have to go back with them. Eleanor turned to study his profile. So was I, not just for myself, but I didn't want to leave here, leave the Bakers. She paused, gathering her courage. Leave you? Beau's eyes met hers, filled with an emotion that made her heart race. I'm glad to hear that, because I've grown rather accustomed to seeing you every day, Miss Fletcher. Eleanor, she corrected gently. After everything we've been through, I think we're well past formalities, don't you? A smile touched his lips. Eleanor, he repeated, as if savoring the sound. I know we haven't known each other long, but I feel like I've been waiting to meet you my whole life. The confession sent a flutter through her chest. I feel the same way. It's strange, isn't it? How sometimes you can know a person for years and feel nothing, while others, it takes only moments to know they'll change your life forever. Beau took her hand carefully, giving her every opportunity to pull away. When she didn't, his fingers curled around hers. I don't have much to offer, he said earnestly. Just a foreman's salary and the promise that I'd spend every day trying to make you happy. But if you'd consider staying not just at the Bakers, but with me, I'd be the luckiest man in Montana territory. Eleanor felt tears spring to her eyes, but unlike the tears she'd shed in recent months, these were born of joy. Are you asking what I think you're asking, Beau Ironwood? He smiled, reaching into his pocket and producing a simple silver ring. I got this in town yesterday. It's not fancy, but it's perfect, she whispered, as he slid it onto her finger. Eleanor Fletcher, would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife? Not because anyone is forcing you, but because if I'm not being too presumptuous, we might have found something worth building a life around. Eleanor looked at the ring on her finger, then back at the man who had quite literally shot her previous marriage contract to pieces. Yes, she answered without hesitation. Yes, I will marry you, Beau Ironwood. His smile was brighter than the setting sun as he leaned forward, pausing just before their lips met. May I? He asked respectfully. In answer, Eleanor closed the distance between them, sealing their promise with a kiss that felt like coming home. 3 months later, on a perfect autumn day, Eleanor Fletcher became Eleanor Ironwood in a simple ceremony at the Rockingbee Ranch. Benjamin Baker stood as Beau's best man, while Sarah, with baby Joseph in her arms, served as Eleanor's matron of honor. The territorial judge, true to Benjamin's prediction, had investigated Charles's management of Eleanor's inheritance and found substantial evidence of misappropriation. Charles had fled the territory rather than face charges, but not before the judge ordered the remaining funds, still a considerable sum, returned to Eleanor's control. With her newfound financial independence, Eleanor could have chosen any path, any place to build her life. But the choice was easy. The Bakers had offered to sell Beau and Eleanor a parcel of the Rockingbee at a fair price, allowing them to establish their own small ranch adjacent to their friends. As they exchanged vows beneath an archway of autumn wildflowers, Eleanor couldn't help but marvel at how drastically her life had changed in such a short time. From the brink of a forced marriage to a man she feared, to freely choosing a life with a man she loved deeply, all because a brave cowboy couldn't stand by and watch an injustice unfold. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Beau kissed her with such tenderness that several of their guests dabbed at their eyes. The celebration that followed was filled with music, laughter, and the warm embrace of their newly formed community. As the evening drew to a close, Beau led Eleanor away from the festivities toward their new home, a modest cabin they had spent the past months preparing together. "Are you happy, Mrs. Ironwood?" he asked, his arms encircling her waist as they stood on their own porch, gazing up at the star-filled Montana sky. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," she answered truthfully, turning in his embrace to face him. "Do you ever think about how different our lives would be if you hadn't ridden into Willow Creek that day? If you hadn't shot that contract to pieces?" Beau smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face with gentle fingers. "I try not to dwell on what might have been, but I thank God every day that I was there at that moment. Some might call it chance, but I prefer to think of it as destiny." "Destiny?" Eleanor repeated, savoring the word. "I like that. Though I should confess," he added with a playful glint in his eye, "shooting a piece of paper wasn't exactly proper gunmanship. My old riding partner would have never let me hear the end of it." Eleanor laughed, the sound carrying across their land their future. "Proper or not, it was the most romantic thing anyone's ever done for me." Beau's expression grew serious, his eyes reflecting the depth of his feelings. "I promised on our wedding day to protect you, provide for you, and love you until my dying breath. That's a contract I intend to honor without any gunshots required." "I'll hold you to that, cowboy," she whispered, rising on her tiptoes to kiss him as the first stars of evening watched over their new beginning. 5 years later, Eleanor sat on that same porch, watching Beau teaching their 4-year-old son Benjamin how to ride his first pony, while their 2-year-old daughter Emma squealed with delight from her mother's lap. Their small ranch had prospered, growing from a modest homestead to a respectable operation with a small herd of cattle and the finest horses in the county. The Bakers remained their closest friends and neighbors, their children growing up together like cousins. Eleanor had used a portion of her inheritance to establish Willow Creek's first proper school, where she taught 3 days a week while Sarah looked after Emma. As the sun began to set on another day of the life they had built together, Beau brought little Benjamin up to the porch, the boy chattering excitedly about his riding accomplishments. "Mama, did you see me? I rode all by myself," he exclaimed, climbing into her lap alongside his sister. "I did see, my brave boy," Eleanor confirmed, kissing his dusty cheek. "You're going to be an excellent horseman just like your father." Beau sat beside them, his arm automatically finding its place around Eleanor's shoulders. "He's a natural, that's for certain." As the children's excitement gave way to drowsiness, Beau and Eleanor shared a look of contented understanding that only comes from years of building a life together. I still can't believe how fortunate we are, Eleanor said softly, leaning her head against his shoulder as the children dozed in her lap. Beau pressed a kiss to her temple. Not fortune, my love. Just the courage to claim the life we wanted instead of accepting the one others tried to force upon us. Eleanor smiled, thinking of the tattered contract that had brought them together. Sometimes the most beautiful stories began with an act of defiance and a cowboy brave enough to shoot convention to pieces.